I have no witty transition to this next story from that story.
I may charge you off the set.
This next big story we can talk about from 2008, the safe haven law.
Exactly.
And the way that Nebraska was suddenly thrust into the national spotlight because of all of the people bringing their kids to Nebraska to drop off at hospitals. Nebraska, the legislature made the decision to have an open-ended safe haven law. Everyone agreed we needed a safe haven law. They just didn't put a time limit on how old the kid could be, so we were getting 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds. Right. And even here in Grand Island, while our case of the safe haven didn't really apply, it showed what all these cases showed, and there's a problem with a lack of care and a lack of oversight for children that need help from, in troubled situations or whatever the case may be, at an age that isn't covered anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Well, you framed the problem very well. Nebraska was the 50th state to have a safe haven law, and certainly needed. And because they didn't define it, most people thought, well, it was a child, and in Nebraska state law, that's 17 and under. And you're right, teenagers began to show up, and state senators were looking around at each other and went, well, no, this isn't what we meant. And the governor said, this isn't what we meant. Unfortunately, that's what the law said.
That's what you signed.
But that's what you signed. And so, it was a difficult situation. I wrote extensively on this. One of the points I made is, in a way, it worked well because it highlighted for everyone the problems that you talk about, the problems of access to treatment, delays in treatment, who do you turn to, and it's more than just dialing 211. 211 is a wonderful resource, but for many families, you need much more than that. And so the governor called a special session. They set the limit at 30 days. And that's fine, but that didn't address the problem that you speak of. And I hope in 2009, I know Senator Annette Dubas has been at the forefront of this. She's on a task force now to introduce legislation to look at these issues. I think everyone in the state is really watching what they are going to do to solve these problems. And I think right after the first year when the legislature convenes, I think you'll see many people, they'll be looking in the paper and to see what's going on in Lincoln to address these issues. Grand Island, we had one young man who was 18 and too old and was turned away. And then we had a 50.
Wanted help.
Yeah, he wanted help, exactly. And that points out exactly the problem that you're talking about. And then we had a 15-year-old who was dropped off later. The other thing that happened there, I thought, we had national press. I don't know if it was positive national press, or I don't even know, but it was national press. Sometimes the positive and negative thing, it's hard to quantify. But I think also the New York Times and the NBC and all the people that came here to cover this, I think they'll follow up on that as well, to see what is Nebraska doing. Because it's interesting that from what I've read in those reports, so goes Nebraska, so goes the rest of the United States on this issue, because we're not the only state where teenagers and kids, older than toddlers, that states have trouble placing these children and finding the right therapies and the right practices that help them. So it's not just us, it's other states as well.
Well, it seems when any time an issue comes up for one state and everyone puts their focus on it, like the safe haven, there is the heightened pressure to find a solution. And when they do finally find a solution, it better be good enough because everyone's going to see it.
Everyone's going to see it.
And a lot of other states will quietly say, hey, I'm glad that happened to them.
Right.
I'm glad Nebraska's solving this problem because now we can just piggyback on what they did.
Right. Exactly.
Unfortunately, you go through a year of everyone taking vacations to drop off their kids in Grand Island or Nebraska.
Well, it would tell you something, as you mentioned earlier, we have people from other states coming here to drop off their children. Well, that would tell me that they don't have access or availability of services that they need in their states.
Right.
Michigan and Georgia, and there were several states involved. So,
well, when we look at kids, some kids that weren't dropped off, thankfully, were some local athletes at the high schools. How's that for a transition? I know there's some great teams this year in the area, and we celebrated a lot of them. I'm sure, George, there was one that was particularly close to your heart.
There was one particularly close to my heart. The Grand Island Senior High baseball team, my son was a member of that team, won the state championship, their first state championship. Came from an 8 seed and beat vaunted Creighton Prep, who was nationally ranked in the opening round, and went on to win the championship. It was very exciting. the Aurora Husky football team pulled the upset of the year, beating McCook, which I think you told me was ranked number 3 all classes in the nation.
Yeah, at least in the USA Today had them at least in the Midwest.
Right.
Third-ranked team of any class, regardless of size, and that was a good team.
Yeah.
A team that had gone to Aurora earlier in the season, I think the 3rd week of the season, and won like 42-7.
They did.
And Aurora decided, the coach decided, we're changing the way we're doing things. We're gonna rework our entire offense to be able to score against McCook. It also worked against every other team they played because they didn't lose again,
Right.
including when McCook came to town. They beat them in the semifinals of the playoffs, and then went on to play a very good Beatrice team in Lincoln,
Right.
and won that game too.
So it was a terrific season. A great, a great Cinderella story and a great turnaround for Aurora. Kids really deserving of, buying into the coach's, philosophy. We're going to change things up here, and it worked for them. And so, congratulations to the Huskies. The other thing in volleyball, once again, I think Central Nebraska can kind of keep the crown as the queens, if you will, of high school volleyball. We had 9 teams from our coverage area go to state. We had a champion in Ravenna, I believe. But Grand Island Senior High and Northwest and Grand Island Central Catholic from the city all qualified. Central Catholic played in the finals. Northwest played in the finals. Just terrific. I think I told you yesterday that Nebraska per capita has more D1 volleyball players than any other state in the union. And of course, if you watched anything down at the Quest Center here last week, that they packed that place because the Huskers were there. They packed it. Then 2 nights later, the Huskers weren't even playing when Stanford beat Penn State beat Stanford. So, this is volleyball is a huge thing in Nebraska, and I see that continuing.
In Central Nebraska, especially, with again all 3 local Grand Island schools going. The one school that I think maybe has the greatest accomplishment though of our area high schools was a school that decided to have a basketball game a little longer than the normal basketball game. Heartland Lutheran going over 77 hours straight playing basketball, and fantastic story here to raise money for Heartland Lutheran High School. The kids, their coach decided we're going to have a game, and we're going to play and play and play and play to set the Guinness Book of World Record for longest basketball game. 77 hours, 7 minutes, 7 seconds, I think. Lots of sevens there.
But who's counting, right?
And I hear at the end of the year they'll be able to say that from that game they'll have raised $77,777.77, as was their dream goal for this. Kids did fantastic. I had a chance to go out there during the game. Kids playing, alumni playing, lots of people watching. They played straight through, and that I think is going to prove, I don't want to give anything away, to be one of the more popular stories of the year of all of our stories.
Oh, certainly, yeah. Kind of redefines the term gym rat.
It stank.
Yeah,
it stank.
I imagine it probably
fun
did.
to watch.
Yeah.